Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Texas Blockcast. I'm excited about this conversation, as I am about every conversation, but specifically I'm here with an old friend of mine, Dan Spuller, who is the Senior Director of Industry Affairs at the Blockchain Association, and also helps spearhead North Carolina's advocacy efforts at the state level through y'all's organization there and the U.S. Blockchain Coalition. But Dan, tell me a little bit, first of all, what brought you to town? We're here in person recording this. You're normally in DC. So what brought you to Dallas? And then also, let's talk a little bit about your background and how you made your way to the BA.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's always good to be back in Texas. I'm in town. I came here to Dallas this week. I was invited to participate in an organization called the State Financial Officers Foundation. So it's a gathering, it's an association, if you will, of state treasurers and state auditors and financial regulators, just to talk about the issues of the day. And more they're hearing about this CBDC discussion. And so they wanted to have a panel of folks to come and give them the lay of the land, talk about the threats, the possibilities, the probabilities, and some great alternatives to CBDCs, which, I oppose. And the panel went well. We talked about stablecoins. We talked about the different topics of the day. And anyway, and that's why I'm here. So I wanted to come by and say hi.
It's amazing that these topics are now what were niche topics just a couple years ago are now mainstream conversations.
That's right.
So we're going to dive into those later. But a little bit about your background and.
Sorry, real quick, could you move the. Dan, could you move your stuff to the table that's holding the microphones?
Oh, yeah.
Not your book, but yep. Thank you.
How's that?
That'll work.
Yep. Thanks.
So I'll lead into that question again. So tell us a little bit about your background. I know you've got some policy experience, also some energy, oil and gas background. Yeah. How did you end up at the BA?
I've had an interesting, career. My background had been mostly in public administration. I worked for the North Carolina Department of Commerce and the State Banking Commissioner's Office. And this was 2011, 2012. And simultaneously, I got really hooked onto Bitcoin, much more as an enthusiast. A couple of friends of mine, my brother, we went to the meetups. We went to just a few different gatherings early on. And that's how I first really got into Bitcoin, just as a hobby. And we put on a series of conferences in Raleigh and in Charlotte, 2014, 2015, and it really opened up the doors, I think, for a lot of us in that part of the country. It was a regional conference, and we had some big names come. And I met a lot of folks early on in the industry, and I decided really just to make a big pivot. But before I moved full-time up to Washington, D.C., I really started to focus more on the state level. And so we worked closely to improve the State Money Transmitters Act. We got a virtual currency definition baked into the state law. And so that's when I was working mostly in economic development and regulations. And then, as you pointed out, I just, by sheer luck, I also am a registered landman in North Carolina. I registered for that way back during, in the early 2010s, let's say, because fracking was a big issue back then. Now, I had never really leveraged the landman license, but I saw that you're doing some landman events down here in Texas, and I thought, oh, small world. I've never used it, so I don't really have too much of a focus or background in energy, but it's an important topic.
Yeah, and economic development, it's always part of the conversation.
Yeah.
So here now in the position that you find yourself at the Blockchain Association, what are sort of the topics that are? It's been a good month for our industry from a legal perspective. What most excites you guys at the BA and your members about the trajectory that we're on over the last month or so?
Well, one of the reasons why I was brought on to the Blockchain Association and was brought on to help grow the organization was to bring in the best of the best, the companies that really want to roll their sleeves up and they really want to help make a difference on the regulatory aspects of the industry and the policy side. For years, very few companies had a large push or interest in actually improving the regulatory landscape. Yeah. And we've worked with numerous companies to kind of change that narrative. So whereas the conversations 2, 3, 4 years ago we couldn't really have imagined how far we've come. Now, we still have a long way to go, but what excites me the most is the changes we've seen just in the narrative and the dialogue among active members of Congress, the growth of the Congressional Blockchain Caucus, and then actual real pieces of legislation being heard, moving through committee and to the floor. And pieces of legislation that actually have a real shot of getting through.
Yeah.
There's been a variety of topics over the years that we focused on and will continue to focus on, but the ones we think this summer, particularly that are of most importance, are the digital asset market structure conversation, the stablecoins conversation, and then, of course, this ETF situation. Now, that's more of a legal side, but we've seen a lot of positive developments, at least on the ETF side.
Yeah.
This month in particular has been a pretty bad month for the SEC. It's been a good month for the industry. So it's August 30th, so it's basically the end of this month. But over the last few weeks, we've just seen a lot of positive developments. I don't necessarily think legal and lawsuits are the best way to move legislation or policy, but sometimes that's what it takes.
Sure. Because the elected officials are viewing and kind of digesting what the courts are saying, and vice versa, right? The judges on the bench are looking at the legislature and seeing, okay, well, they're moving through committee. They have a market structure bill, a FIT bill, as the new acronym is. Right. They have a stablecoin bill that has moved through with bipartisan support, and not only that, but the SEC has overstepped its powers in a number of circumstances, and that's probably a far more important reason for them to rule the way that they have. But they do play off of each other a little bit. It'd be crazy if they didn't.
Well, sure, and you don't forget. I mean, the SEC it's an agency, so their oversight is Congress. It's the House Financial Services Committee, and oftentimes when there's no regulatory clarity, you see agencies take matters into their own hands. And that's all the more reason why we need this digital asset market structure development, and we need true congressional oversight, because the agencies just execute the laws that Congress passes. But when there's no laws, then they'll either base them off previously set rules that were in place, in some cases decades that are old, and they don't always necessarily fit with the modern times. And we've seen that with the SEC as a classic example.
Now, the bills that have moved out of the Financial Services Committee, let's talk about the politics of that. So you've got several Democrats coming on with Patrick McHenry and with Representative Hill and others. Not all of them, though. I think Richie Torres sort of led the Democratic bloc, and Maxine Waters held back her support. Given that the ranking Democratic member held back her support on both of the FIT bill, which is the market structure, and the stablecoin bill. What do you think we will see as far as like the timing? When will that be in front of Senate banking? Like, when will they have that on their desk?
Well, I think there's a few points of history to be made about the success that we've had, I think, with this digital asset market structure discussion, the FIT bill. Not only was it House Financial Services, but it was also House Ag, which is chaired by Congressman G.T. Thompson out of Pennsylvania. Rarely, to my knowledge, and again, I'm not a lobbyist, that my colleagues Ron, Hammond, and Kristen and Jake really do a fantastic job of pushing our policy issues on the Hill, but I monitor it pretty closely. And to me, it was the first time where I've seen two committees really come together, House Ag and House Financial Services. Ag, of course, oversees the CFTC and commodities futures. House Financial Services oversees the SEC. Rarely, maybe if ever, have they come together to collectively work on a very complicated market structure piece and then get it actually to the committee for a vote. So that, to me, was a big victory just in and of itself. Bipartisan on both committees, and the leaderships have changed. So a couple years back, when the Democratic Party had control of the House, Maxine Waters was the chairwoman. And there's been some growing pains there with the industry's relationship with her, but we thought we got it to a pretty good place. Then the House changes parties after the last election, and McHenry went from ranking member to chairman. They have a very good working relationship, but like all things in Washington, politics at the end of the day will come into play. And unfortunately, sometimes that's at the expense of really good progress. So what happened was the morning of when the bill was actually being debated in the committee, the White House, the U.S. Treasury Department, essentially contacted Maxine Waters and wanted hey, let's slow this down, let's put a stop to this. We have some concerns. So after all that work, suddenly Maxine Waters was an antagonist to the process, which I'm sure McHenry and his staff and the others probably didn't appreciate because of the work that they had all done together. And then of course French Hill did a great job too, with the subcommittee. He did a terrific job on the stablecoin side, but it slowed things down. And if you watch the video, it was going for hours on end. And not only that, we were actually competing across the hallway in Congress. That was the same day of the famous UFO hearing. And so all the attention was going to that side, even though we were so focused on the market structure side. But the politics did play a role. It passed. It obviously, after much trying and tribulations, but we got it through. Now the next step, of course, is a full floor vote. And then if all things go well, it's off to the Senate. But to me, this was a big development for the industry. It was a moral victory. It was an important victory for us. The industry's worked very hard, I think, to get to that place. We have more work to do, but just for historical reasons for your audience, this is a big deal for us. We've come a long way as an industry. And just countless hours of many different companies, many different associations to get to where we're at. So if it doesn't happen this year, then we got to factor in the election. After the reason why the industry, we wanted to get this done so badly this fall is because if you can't get something done the fall before a major presidential election, the next year and a half, everybody's going to their sides. Yeah. Everybody's going to go to their sides and slow things down, and then we'd have to wait probably till 2025.
So say, we get it through the House on the floor,
sure,
and then it goes over to the Senate. There's no way that the Senate would push it through this fall, right? I mean, that's very unlikely.
Most likely dead on arrival. And that were the words probably of Senator Warren herself. And that's, again, it's unfortunate, but look who controls the U.S. Senate. You have Sherrod Brown, of course, the Senate banking, and Senator Warren, who has got enormous influence in this administration with Joe Biden.
Who's the ranking member on Senate banking for, and you may not know this, for the Republicans?
It would be...
I'll Google it while we're talking.
You have to Google it.
I'll Google it while we're talking.
Yeah, Ron would know. But I know we do work with several good leaders on that committee, including North Carolina Senator Tillis and others. Yeah, you could take a look at that.
I did see that the likelihood that the Senate switches parties is pretty high.
Interestingly enough, it's actually, based on the polling, it's more likely that the Republicans will re-win the Senate and potentially lose the House, which would be very interesting.
That's fascinating. Yeah.
Things can happen either way, but the Democratic Party has an extremely uphill battle for their defending their Senate map. And then the House side's interesting because a lot of these new congressional districts that have been developed after the census are coming into light, including Texas. I think you have 1 or 2 new seats.
New seats. So it's Tim Scott.
Oh, that's right. Tim Scott, who is the presidential candidate himself. Yeah, that's right.
He's a great advocate for all things U.S. innovation. Yeah. I mean, just incredible member of Congress. So, wish him the best on his presidential run. Let's talk presidential politics. Mm-hmm. We just had the GOP debate. I sent out a letter to all of our constituents and all of our newsletter followers that I was disappointed in the way that debate transpired.
Yeah.
It was not becoming of future presidential candidates.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a little rowdy.
It was a little rowdy and very lacked civility and statesmanship. But we have some candidates who understand, and it's funny, every election we talk about this, but every election becomes more true. It's on a spectrum, the amount of attention that's being played to this. And early on, it was probably like more bluster than anything. Now it's actually something that, 5 minutes ago, Vivek, or I guess 10 minutes ago now, Vivek Ramaswamy tweets about central bank digital currencies, and obviously he's against them. We advocate against them. You guys are concerned, have your concerns as well. So we're all waited or waiting sort of with bated breath about what all of these candidates are going to do and say. Of course, RFK, Vivek, they both spoke at Bitcoin Miami. What are you hearing from like in the hallways, the campaign managers, sort of away from the spotlight? Is this pervasive, or are we as an industry reading too much into it still?
I think it is pervasive, and I think that's a sign of the times. I remember one of the very first presidential candidates that even spoke about Bitcoin in any capacity was Rand Paul way back in 2016 when he ran. I think he was the first major presidential candidate to accept Bitcoin. But that was the extent of it. I mean, he was accepting Bitcoin is one thing. But now let's fast forward. 2020, I think at one point Mike Bloomberg actually had like a blockchain position paper on his website. That was notable. But this is the cycle now, 2024 cycle. I think this is the first major presidential cycle where our industry is being taken very seriously. Yeah. And it could be for a variety of reasons. Obviously, you could talk about the mainstreaming of Bitcoin and blockchain the last few years, the enormous amount of political fundraising that has taken place within our industry, for better or for worse. There were some bad actors. Obviously, we all remember FTX, and that left bad taste in quite a few folks' mouth in Washington, D.C. But it got people talking. And now, Let's look at the numbers. So Mayor of Miami, Suarez, who just dropped out yesterday, he was by far probably the biggest Bitcoiner proponent, and he's done a lot for the local community, and he accepts it himself in salary. Governor DeSantis doing a great job in Florida. When he announced, he started talking about Bitcoin, and then he did that executive order banning CBDCs in Florida. That's real tangible work. So he's taking the industry seriously. Ramaswamy is definitely coming out strong. A lot of people in our industry really like him. Part of my role is to monitor, let's say, crypto politics and the industry affairs and what's going on, where the dynamics are. There's a huge rush of interest towards Ramaswamy. And I will say about him, he gets it on a fundamental level. It's not just paper thin. I'm not taking sides in the presidential race. Sure. I'm just giving you like my opinion here. And he genuinely has asked questions about consensus mechanisms, proof of work, proof of stake. He's asked about permissionless, permission. These are the questions that a novice wouldn't ask.
Right.
So that's just not accepting donations. He's actually getting into the weeds. So he gets it. I think that there will be, of course, RFK Jr., Bobby Kennedy Jr., he's definitely pro-Bitcoin. There will be more. And I relish the day where this actually comes up on the debate stage. I was kind of hoping it would last week during that rowdy debate. The UFO question came up interestingly. They're there again. But there will be a point where this has become just a natural issue, and it's part of the greater digital transformation that's happening really within our country, because AI is obviously really hot right now too, and there's no question that'll be a major policy topic, I think, in the presidential cycle. So we need to have somebody win that gets the industry, that gets the technology, and will, of course, surround themselves with favorable regulators and stakeholders that will give us consideration. And obviously, when the new administration, whether it's a second term or whether it's a new administration comes in, they're going to have to really clean house, I think, and put in a new crop of policymakers and regulators that I think will have a real opportunity to be a part of that discussion.
So in my estimation, the worst outcome for our industry is another Biden administration. RFK is probably not going to get a chance. The Democratic Party is not going to let him be the nominee. And I think the worst candidate on the Republican side is actually the presumptive nominee as well. So what do we expect if we have those two nominees, the octogenarians, what I call them? How do we, and say Biden were to win, what do we do as an industry who are the persuadable people within that administration that we should be working on right now? Like, are we targeting? How do we get to those people?
Well, good question. There are. Let's just, for the sake of argument, let's say those two individuals are the nominees. Let's look at the facts. So, if Joe Biden wins and gets reelected, there's almost no question that Gary Gensler will not remain as SEC chairman. I think that most of the individuals, from what we hear within FSOC, within the financial regulatory circles, including Treasury and Janet Yellen herself, they are not particularly fond of him. Now, he has a 5-year term, and it's so technically he could remain. He works at the pleasure of the president, but he could technically remain for another year, even if a Republican wins. I don't think that'll ever happen. Most of the time, they'll just step down as rule of thumb. But no, I don't think he will remain as chairman. I also don't think he's going to get any promotion anytime soon, despite if that's what he wants, as Treasury Secretary. So,
but what about within the Treasury? That's really where we have some other concerns, and it's mostly administration folks, right? It's not like lifers.
No, these are all political appointees.
Yeah, they're all political appointees.
The heads of the agencies and the higher ups within Treasury and FinCEN, obviously, and IRS, those are all political appointments. So they come and go as the party of the president. I am very optimistic, and I think the Deputy Treasury Secretary, Wally Al-Yamnu, is very open to learning more about our industry. He spoke at Consensus last year. That's crazy. Nobody.
That's awesome.
So that was very promising. And Janet Yellen, I don't think she's going to be. I was surprised he actually stuck around after the midterms. I don't think she would stick around for a second term. So he would have obviously a very, very strong front-runner status to potentially be put in as Secretary of the Treasury. Then I think we'd have somebody that would be open to learning more and perhaps putting in some key stakeholders, some advocates, or even not necessarily advocates, individuals that would give us a fair shot to come in and talk.
And what state does he hail from? Like, where's his political base?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Where's his political base? Like, what state does he hail from?
He is, he used to be an Obama administration appointee, actually. So he doesn't have.
So he's DC all the way.
I believe. I'm not quite sure where he hails from, but no, he's a creature of Washington.
Okay.
So, we'll see and that's just a speculation. There's others out there. He could bring in somebody from the private sector. He can promote somebody internally. But we are working hard. Dave Grimaldi, my colleague, he represents us on the Democratic side. He's got really good resources within the White House and with Commerce and Treasury. So we take these meetings and. Like last year during the executive order discussion, we participated in that when the Biden administration put out a request for subject matter experts to come in and provide intel. We participated, so that was a good sign. And then FTX happened, and everything gets thrown out the window. So the industry needs to clean itself up, and I think we've done. We're not going to let a few bad actors ruin it for everybody because we all are working very hard. But we just need to build that trust, and we need to make it less partisan. And it's just unfortunate that Elizabeth Warren commands so much influence in the Biden administration because she is probably our number one antagonist at the Senate. If she wasn't in the picture, I think things would be different. But let's talk about Trump now. So I'm actually not convinced Trump even knows what Bitcoin is. Everybody remembers that tweet he did a couple of years back in 2019. When I saw that, I kind of chuckled because I think somebody was probably writing that for him. The real problem with the Trump administration from 2017 to 2021 was Secretary Mnuchin, who was no fan of Bitcoin or blockchain for that matter. And as he was leaving, and when he was walking out the door at the late December, is when he put forward that NPRM that cracked down on what we call self-hosted wallets, unhosted wallets.
With a very short comment period.
It was ridiculous, and that ruined Christmas. We were working all month long on that. But he's out. I think though Trump is interesting because the Republican Party has come extremely more favorable towards Bitcoin and blockchain technology over the last 3-4 years. It's almost dominating compared to both parties. There's just overwhelmingly supportive more on the conservative side. So I think politically speaking, Trump would bring in a new slew of appointees. I believe he would bring in somebody like Brian Brooks, who's extraordinarily favorable towards our industry. In my opinion, he'd be a fantastic Treasury Secretary.
Oh, incredible!
And if your folks remember, he's the one that used to run the OCC as an acting capacity that pushed forward that federal charter for banks. So somebody like him, perfect choice. Or we'll bring in somebody else from the industry or from Congress. So I think a second Trump administration. I'm not writing it off as being bad for Bitcoin. Actually, I think it would be much better. And it's funny because even the president himself, whether he knows it or not, is sitting on a hoard of Ethereum. So he himself is a crypto holder from that NFT sale that he did.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes the presidency is bigger than any one man. It is a major organization. And it's just too bad that you have two of the most unpopular candidates in history right now that are both running against each other. I wish that wasn't the case, but the primaries are going to play themselves out. And my boss Kristen, she was on a podcast with FinTech Frank from the Block the other day, and she actually, one of her theories is she thinks she doesn't think either one of them are going to be the nominee. She thinks like there's going to be something's going to happen. Maybe it's going to be Gavin Newsom that comes in and he saves the day for the Democrats, and maybe it's going to be Ramaswamy or DeSantis. We don't know. I mean, it's a lifetime. It's still over a year and a half away.
Yeah. Well, the primary though.
The primary is coming up quick.
Coming
up in just like January. So
yeah,
a lot of time though.
Yeah, it is. It is. So okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think that's interesting for our listeners to get the federal perspective because we're often talking about state stuff. Mm-hmm. So let's stay on the federal conversation for a minute. As far as the U.S. industry is concerned, have you guys seen a slow trickle of capital and talent out of the U.S., or has it been more substantial?
Great question. So that's part of what I do. Again, on the industry affairs side, I'm monitoring the temperature. I'm monitoring the landscape. And I always really try to find out where the talent's going. You can always look who's raising the most money, who's doing this, but where the most talented developers, where the most talented people are going, they're still sticking with these American companies.
Good.
And I think that's a good sign, despite what maybe the overall narrative is, where you're hearing companies saying, I'm going to move to England or I'm going to move to the EU because they have the MICA, they have actual. At the end of the day, these companies are going to want to do business in the United States. And I'm not convinced that any of them will pack up and leave for one reason or another. Now, we have challenges here, but we need their help. We need the industry to work with us, just like we need to work at the state level with what you're doing. So the funding, compared to the hype cycle last go around, 2021, things were riding high. There was money coming in left and right. You can do anything and you can raise money from a VC. That's certainly slowed down, but that's natural because there'll be another cycle every 4 years, right? And I think there'll be more projects that come of age. But the funding, I think that has slowed a little bit, but the talent is continuing to grow. The amount of industries, the amount of professionals that want to get into the industry in crypto is still growing. And then there's just new projects that are always coming online. I mean, we're talking about real-world assets now. RWA, that is booming right now. We're talking about tokenization. FriendTech, we're talking about the social aspects of the technology. So there's always going to be new innovation. And I think because of that, our industry is doing the opposite of slowing down.
I love to hear that. I feel like sometimes I'll hear of people like saying, yeah, we're setting up in the Bahamas or Liechtenstein or Singapore, and it just kills me. So excited to hear that from where you sit in your seat. You mentioned real world assets.
Yeah.
It's a topic that we hit on quite a bit here. I'm wondering, Dallas, especially DFW, is a real estate hotbed, right,
sure.
for the country, and sort of a bellwether as well. I'm wondering if you've observed what we've observed, which is that there's no national securities exchange for tokenized assets to speak of, right?
Yeah.
That are actually moving assets. There are a myriad of ATSs
Sure.
that are siloed and have no liquidity. I don't want to call out names.
I know what you mean, though.
Yeah. Very little liquidity, very little eyeballs. How do we get that to change? Is that an ATS that swallows up the other ones, or is that a national securities exchange for tokenized assets?
It depends. And I think this is one of the next big issues on the horizon because, again, this might be one of those so-called killer use cases that everybody keeps talking about over the years. But there's more resources in physical real estate in the world than it is
The largest sector by
everything.
far. Yeah.
It blows everything else out of the water. So there absolutely will be a regulated structural body that can focus on digital assets, real-world assets, tokenized real estate. All the more reason why we need this digital asset market structure bill. Where would it fall?
Because they're definitely securities, though.
Well, right. In this case, they would be because you actually would be securitizing physical real estate, and what we've seen with REITs and with other stocks and equities.
Right.
And it's been attempted over the years. Like you could talk about fractionalizing. Years ago, this one big investor was going to buy the Chrysler building in New York City and tokenize it, securitize it if you want to call it that, and then sell shares. Obviously, that would be a security offering.
Yeah.
That is exciting to me, though, and I think that would bring a lot of more new individuals into the ecosystem. And then we can decide, they could decide what blockchain they would want to use, et cetera.
Yeah.
But there needs to be, for that to really succeed, it needs to be regulated. And we've seen projects over the years, some good ones. Some of them are still sticking around. T0, Securitize. I'm naming now some projects and some companies that have been really working hard on this.
That's a mixture of public and private blockchains, though, right? I mean, they don't always use public chains.
Not always, and that's one of those dichotomies to see like where the industry. I mean, it should be market driven. It should be where the demand is. But I think we're in the earlier discussions around RWAs, we're seeing a lot more of this content being brought up at conferences. We're seeing a lot more talk about RWA at like mainnet. I'm sure permissionless. We'll have a discussion on that. The Twitter Spaces. I mean, you can always just tell when there's a hot topic. I'm not talking about a shiny new object. I'm talking about like a major industry vertical. Some past major industry verticals that we've seen over the years, the metaverse was really hot for a long time, and it's still going to be around. We had GameFi, we had just general tokenization. This RWA thing though is quite interesting because it brings in mainstream institutional discussions, the BlackRocks, the big companies. And when you start bringing them in and talking about a regulated product, you've hit something. So I think that'll be fascinating to watch over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it transpires because it's been on my mind for a long time. Tokenized real estate and blockchain for land administration was what I worked on as a political science professor like 8 years ago, 9 years ago.
So
that's like my research area, and I've always thought this has got to be a market. This is not going to be driven by county clerks or by the public side. This is going to have to be driven by private investment.
Yeah.
And we've seen a couple buildings here and there in Dallas, Houston, Austin get tokenized. Nothing super substantial, and I think it's a liquidity crunch because you have all these ATSs that don't have the liquidity. But when you're talking about a national securities exchange that deals with tokenized assets, that can sort of work with, as the broker, work with all the other brokers actually. That is exciting to me. But it's such a, we need a large company to come in and just say, we're going to do this. We're going to buy a couple ATSs, rope them into our fold. We're going to apply for the national securities license and really just be the Dow or the NASDAQ for private equity. And I don't know who's going to do that, but...
Well, it's wide open. And I think that there will be companies out there that will jump at the opportunity. And it could be, an existing entity like an ICE or a, like what they do up in Chicago with CME and CBO.
Yeah.
And those are very large national.
The barriers to entry are so high, I think it has to be.
Yeah.
I think it has to be.
To start new, you're going up against, companies that are 100 plus years old and they all dominate to certain market shares. But where would it fall under though? Because, you have CBO, you have CME, that's all CFTC regulated, right? Options. Securities products would be, of course, SEC.
Right.
And
it'd be a whole new division.
So I
for
think
some of these
a company
companies.
would, like of the size and stature of like a Citadel or like the ICE, the big players, I think would have the resources to build out such a thing. But it has to be an exchange. There has to be an opportunity for everybody to participate. And I think it'll open up the floodgates too to a lot of interest in real estate and actually being able to acquire stake and opportunity in real estate that perhaps folks might not normally be able to acquire.
Yeah.
Like shares.
It is one of those things that, touches almost every person in North America.
Yeah.
In the world, really. Hernando de Soto is a Peruvian economist, and he estimates that there is $20 trillion worth of real estate that's owned by the world's poor, the impoverished, people that live on less than a few dollars a day. $20 trillion if you aggregate it. And that alone, capitalism doesn't always take into context the kind of humanitarian piece of this. But if you were to be able to monetize and, securitize, and they'd be secure in their property rights as well, how differently would those assets be developed by not only them, but also the people that they choose to do business with?
It could be life changing for a lot of them.
It could be incredible. So I know we need to. that again, we need the commercial impetus to be stronger for this to actually take off. Otherwise, the Citadels of the world would have already done it.
And I mean, if you think of Bitcoin, for example, I mean, for years it was, it was not mainstream, right? But then the large institutional players started to get into it, and now we're talking seriously about ETFs.
Yeah.
And that to me, there could be a comparable sense to be made there, where once the private sector, the industry decides, hey, there's a real opportunity here, you'll start to see the applications, you'll start to see the actual interest parties come in and engage with it.
I love that we got off on this tangent because it is near and dear to my heart.
Yeah.
And I'm excited that you guys at the BA are thinking more about it and seeing a lot of industry interest in real world assets. It's always been around, but it's sort of been too early.
Yeah.
Kind of like NFTs were too early.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there's some comparable cycles there too.
Yeah.
So I think
they are tokenized. I mean, it is
it's
very similar.
Yeah, same concept.
But maybe a little bit more
physical
mature.
Goods would be a lot different. And to me, that I would be, if we have this conversation, 1 or 2 more years, I think the RWA discussions, that'll become a much more common 3-letter acronym that we're all so familiar with.
Well, Dan, to get your perspective on the industry side of things is very helpful for us. And I know for our viewers, we're looking forward to having you guys down at the summit. I'm not sure if it'll be you or Ron or both of you, whoever
we're
can
excited
come down.
I'm glad you're doing that. That's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that the market, last year we did it 10 days after FTX. So it could not have been worse. And it still was a great show.
Yeah,
and had a lot of people and a lot of great speakers. So we're thinking it can't get worse than that.
Yeah, that was the bottom, right?
That was the bottom, and it still went well. So we think that this one's going to be fantastic, doing it here in DFW. I know you guys have a big conference coming up, too, a couple weeks after ours.
Yeah, we do ours the last week after Thanksgiving, so it's the last week of the month. We did it last year purposefully after the election. But yeah, we're going to do again. It's a policy conference that
up
we
in
do.
DC. Yeah. Lots of important conversations happening. I think everybody's realizing that the policy conversations right now should be the first conversation.
Exactly.
Of any meeting.
That's right.
So, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really enjoyed it.
Tell the audience where they can find you and follow you.
Yeah, sure. Well, anybody can follow me. I'm on Twitter. I'm pretty active on Twitter, just at Dan Spuller, my first and last name. And our website's theblockchainassociation.org. And then if you're in North Carolina, just give me a call. I'd love to talk to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks so much, Lee.
Hey, it's Amy. Click over here to subscribe. Click over here for more content, and we'll see you next time.